Joining us right now via Zoom, again, is Susan Muscat. She's the president of Pro-Family Women. And we're raising awareness about the Biden administration, who is seemingly making it more possible to transition prepubescent children rather than less possible. Welcome back to the show, Susan Muscat.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning.
Yeah, praise be to God. It's good to have you back on the program. So tell us, what is going on here with the Biden administration?
So the Biden administration's HHS announced last week that they are going to be reinterpreting the anti-discrimination provisions of the Affordable Care Act, that's the federal health care law, so that the word sex is not defined just to mean someone's biological sex, but that it would now include sexual orientation and gender identity. And so in their press release, they portrayed as if this is justified so that all Americans could have a broken bone fixed, but that is not really what this is about. This is starting down the path of mandating that hospitals, like Catholic hospitals and doctors, will be required to provide experimental gender transition therapies to minor children.
Now, this seems rather alarming to Catholics. Why would we be doing this? It seems like an attack against the dignity of the person created in the image and likeness of God. But just from a secular, even a sort of a common sense standpoint, in your article, you mentioned that there are states or countries, rather, in Western Europe that already recognize that this is probably not a good thing.
Exactly. I mean, the Biden administration is moving in the opposite direction of what we are seeing others do in countries overseas. Just 2 months ago, a renowned hospital in Sweden, liberal Sweden, this hospital is in Stockholm, said that it would no longer be providing puberty blockers or sex hormones to young children because they said the possible consequences, the side effects are such, and there was a lack of evidence of the long-term benefits of these treatments. So they therefore said, we are no longer providing these treatments to these children 16 and under. And here's the Biden administration moving in the exact opposite direction. And what this hospital did is huge, Joe, and I'll tell you why. This hospital is going against what the transgender movement is asserting. They're asserting that it's perfectly healthy and normal to give puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to children, and that no one should even question this treatment. And here is this renowned hospital in Sweden saying, no, we are not going to be providing this to children under 16 anymore.
Wow. Susan Muscat is our guest, president of Pro-Family Women. The website, what is your website, Susan?
It's www.profamilywomen.org. And I welcome all of your listeners to please go to it, sign up for our email so you can stay abreast of this and other issues.
Susan, I was wondering, what is this? Does this have anything to do with the fact that the Biden administration has put someone in the health department that himself is suffering from transgenderism?
Well, that person obviously was quoted in the press release. They obviously are supportive of this new direction. And I mean, again, it's very sad because this is all based on ideology. It's not based on science. Because again, if you look at what others are doing overseas, the High Court in the UK just came out last year saying they didn't even think children under 16 are capable of giving informed consent to these procedures because, again, of the possible side effects. And they said that when these children get on puberty blockers, most of them go on to cross-sex hormones, and that cross-sex hormones may lead to a loss of fertility. And they said, we don't even think minor children are capable of giving informed consent to this kind of experimental therapy.
You know, it is incredibly concerning. I feel for these kids. It makes me want to go home and hug my children just to protect them from the craziness that seems to be surrounding us in these desperate times. Mm-hmm. What can we do about this? What possible avenues do we have to put an end to this, to slow this down, to reverse this process? Is that even possible at this point, Susan Muscat?
Yes. So I would urge your listeners, number one, stay very vigilant and stay abreast of what's happening in the states. There are a number of states that are passing laws to prevent doctors from providing this experimental treatment to minors. And so you want to be aware of it. If your state is doing it, you want to support your legislators. I just read an article yesterday that said the Equality Act has not come to the floor of the Senate, and they attribute it to the fact that the calls coming into the Senate are overwhelmingly against the bill. And that's due to your listeners calling the Senate and saying, we are against this because of various reasons, including religious liberties. So that's number one. Number two, your listeners may become aware of other couples that they know whose children are getting confused about their identity. And you need to show support to those couples that you know. Because what happens is their first instinct is not to affirm the child. And then they talk to the so-called experts who tell them, oh, no, you need to affirm this child and start them on blah, blah, blah treatments. So you want to help those couples. You want to send them the information so they become educated on these side effects and the ramifications. And number three, of course, the most powerful thing we all can do is pray for our country, pray for our children, pray for each other.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe you could speak to this too. If I'm not mistaken, within the transgendered community, depression and addictions and suicide are disproportionately higher than in other segments of society. Have you seen this?
Yeah, there was a study that came out that said some 80% of the children who are experiencing gender dysphoria, have other medical conditions such as anxiety and depression. So these children deserve our compassion. They deserve our empathy, but we cannot affirm them going down this path of these experimental treatments.
It just boggles the mind, though. There's so many well-educated people in policymaking, in the medical sciences, both in psychological and even in the surgery section. It boggles the mind that so many highly educated people could come to the conclusion that a prepubescent child could know one way or the other whether or not they're supposed to be a different gender than the one God created them to be. How do we explain this? How do we get to a society that seems to justify the mutilation of the human body in the way it does?
Yeah, it is really sad when you think of, children can't even get alcohol, right, till they're 21. And yet, they're supposed to be capable of knowing that they want to undergo these therapies that can lead to sterility for the rest of their lives. But, I think, Joe, as our country moves further and further away from the basic truth that God created us male and female in a complementary nature, I think we're just going further and further down these paths. And then you have the media, the mainstream media that supports this. And increasingly you have just people going down these paths and following the lead of the media.
What kind of response do you find from within the Catholic base? It seems like there's a big split there as well. There's a lot of Catholics that would embrace things like transgender therapies and want to prevent rehabilitation for people who are struggling with dysphoria or with same-sex attraction. In many states, we've seen even Catholic governors block these types of therapies that would help these people. What kind of response have you seen from the lay faithful?
I think those that are more well-informed, like that listen to shows like yours, know more of the ramifications of these treatments. I think one of the fears that people think is that, the child will commit suicide. But then the studies have shown, there's a long-term study that showed that people who underwent sexual transition surgery, that they had a completed suicide rate that was like 19 times higher than the general population.
Wow.
So, but you have to be educated on this information, okay? So that's why I think like shows like yours and those that actually are aware and get educated on this. But, if you listen to the mainstream media, you're not going to learn this information.
Susan Musket is our guest. We have just about a couple of minutes left with her. She's the president of Pro Family Woman. And their website, by the way, which we will link to, is profamilywoman.org, profamilywoman.org. Susan, now I'm curious about the bishops and how they have you had any success reaching out to the bishops in our country to try to gain their support and have the bishops spoken out against this particular policy of the Biden administration? What are our bishops doing to help us combat this grave injustice?
Actually, I think the bishops have been doing a great job in terms of the general Equality Act, and within that is education on these issues. They have that webinar that multiple dioceses put together, and that some 16,000 people are still watching on YouTube. I know my own diocesan paper just had a front page story all about the Equality Act and what's happening in our state of Virginia on these issues. And then Archbishop Cordileone was just interviewed recently on this very issue about these experimental therapies. So I think they are doing a great job of trying to educate. Again, if the people are reading the materials, watching the webinars, listening to their bishops, I think, but then if they're just turning into the mainstream media, they're not going to hear this.
Hey, Sus, you got a question?
Yes, for those that are Catholic and that we think that we have no control over this, some of us say, I would never allow this to happen to my own child, but I would never stop anybody else from doing this. Do you think we are, for people that are voting and putting these people in the office, do you think they're complicit in the act?
You got about 60 seconds.
I think everyone, when you vote, that is one of the most important things you can do. And you really need to know where your legislators and the candidates stand on these issues and all the issues, because that is one of the most important things you can do as an American citizen.
All right, Susan Muskett's been our guest. Pro Family Woman is the organization. You can find them online at profamilywoman.org. If they have questions, can they contact you for guidance and assistance?
Most certainly. You can email us, and we'd be happy to help if we can.
All right, profamilywoman.org is the website. God bless you, Susan. Thank you for your continued work. All right, we'll see you back on the next time. We'll have you back on soon. That is going to do it for the What's Concerning Us section. Real quick before we go to our break, I wanted to mention that we sent out that email yesterday about Dr. Paul Kengor and his book, Karl Marx and the Devil. It is such a good book. It was such a good conversation. So if you're on the email list, then you get first access to the entire hour-long conversation. But however, Monday, we are going to be playing a 20-minute segment of that conversation. So you'll be looking forward to at least a taste of it. But if you want the whole thing, you got to get on the email list, and you can do that on our website, grnonline.com. That's grnonline.com. Coming up after the break, we'll have another headline news segment. Then, of course, we're going to be speaking with Jeff Younger, a man who's divorced and fighting to save his own son from being transgendered. We'll be right back.